Hello everybody and welcome back to another Osprey Project vlog from the Birds of Poole Harbour team. My name's Brittany Maxted and I'm the Osprey Project Officer for the charity. Now we're just going into the final week of April 2020 and still desperately awaiting the return of our young male osprey LS7. So we thought to boost everyone's morale while we wait around and stare diligently at that web camera awaiting his return, we thought we would give you a little bit of a background on LS7, a little bit of an exclusive look into his history and his relationship with Poole Harbour, and hopefully finish off by telling you a little bit about what we might expect to see over the next few weeks if and when he does return. But before we do any of that, I want to talk about the name LS7 because there's probably a lot of people out there who either don't know about ospreys or about the way that we monitor them here in the UK, and they'll be thinking that LS7 is a pretty unusual name for an osprey. His name actually derives from the unique alphanumeric code written on the leg ring attached to his right leg. So here in the UK, this is how we monitor the majority of the population. Chicks, as many chicks as possible, are ringed at an age of 6 or 7 weeks old each year, and each one is allocated with a unique code which allows them to be identified throughout their lifetime without the need to recapture those individuals. And that can tell us where a bird has been born, where it might later go, where it might breed, and then often how successful that breeding is. And that's a really powerful tool. Many of you will know that at some other osprey projects around the UK, for example the brilliant Dovey Osprey project in West Wales, they do actually allocate different names to the birds to the ones that are on the leg rings. And often these are local words or local names, and just something that's a bit easier to remember than just a combination of letters and numbers. Now, at present, we're not planning to do that with the Poole Harbour individuals or any individuals we might have here in the future. And the reason behind that is that from a scientific perspective, it is much more useful for us and for anyone studying them to have an individual record of that bird's life history throughout its life. And the best way to get that is by always referring to a bird using its unique code. So at present, we are not looking to rename our birds, but I know a lot of you will be in two minds or have some strong opinions about this. So do let us know down in the comments if you think of a name that you think this would be wasted, we must use it. I'd be interested to hear it. Anyway, back to the star of our show and our very own LS7. I'm going to give you a bit of a background on his life history, and remember, the only way that we can get this information is through that fantastic ringing scheme that goes on here in the UK. LS7 was not born here in Poole Harbour. He was actually hatched and raised from a nest in the Moray area of northeastern Scotland, which is less than 50 kilometres away from the original nest at Loch Garton, which was recolonised in the 1950s. The specific site where he came from has been established since the 1980s and so has a really healthy population in the local area. And this is a key feature of the Translocation Project. We will only ever take chicks from an area which is well established and where we're sure we're not going to have a negative impact by removing individuals. LS7 was collected and ringed on the 9th of July 2017 and was driven down to Dorset 2 days later with the rest of his 8-strong cohort, all with ring numbers ranging from LS0 up to LS7. Once they arrived, they were placed in some release pens overlooking the shores of Poole Harbour, where they'd spend the next 2 weeks really building up their body fat and developing their flying skills. Pretty early on it became clear that LS7 was one of the strongest individuals, and he made really good use of the perching posts that we provided within the pens. After around 2 weeks with us, all of the chicks were removed from the pens and fitted with a radio tag which would allow us to track them once they'd been released from the pens. Tagging is a brilliant opportunity to check over the health of the birds and make sure that they're in good condition, and I'm really happy to say that while tagging LS7, Roy Dennis said that he was in excellent order. This is a good sign that he was a strong bird and that we'd done a good job of looking after him. After tagging, the chicks are returned to the pens to settle back in over the next night or two before their releases over the following days. And the very next morning, the 31st of July, at 3:30 in the morning, the Osprey team arrived down on site to very slowly and very carefully in the dark open up the fronts of the 2 pens containing the 5 eldest chicks. The reason that we do this process in the dark is that it's the time of day when the birds are least likely to get spooked out of the pens and potentially hurt themselves, and it works really well as a method. So we opened the pen doors very calmly and slowly, and fortunately none of the birds flushed out of the pens. They just sat there patiently, and we were confident that when they were ready to leave, they would make that decision. And less than 30 minutes after we'd opened the pen, who should make a move but, you guessed it, LS7 was the first bird to make a flight. He just flew a short distance onto the front of the pen that we'd just opened and sat there quite happily for a moment. And we were all cheering and screaming for joy. Until a peregrine came and dive-bombed him, causing him to take flight and chasing him through the sky. And I remember running outside and watching, and I could not believe that this bird was taking its first ever flight and was dodging this peregrine like it had been on the wing for its entire lifetime. And that was the moment that I knew that LS7 was a really, really good bird. Over the next few hours, the rest of the chicks left the pens, albeit slightly less gracefully than LS7 had done, and over the following days we also released the remaining 3 chicks. So then we had 8 happy, healthy young ospreys using the local area around the pens, starting to learn to explore and continuing to be fed by us 2 or 3 times a day using the feeding stations that we placed nearby. And this is a really interesting time for them. It's a really crucial time when they start to learn about the local area, they learn the landscape, and they start to recognise the area as their home. It's also an interesting time because as they start to range further and we get later into August, they start to meet migrant ospreys passing through the harbour. And they did have one very special interaction. CJ7, who is a Rutland-born female and who at the time was only 2 years old, had chosen to oversummer in Poole Harbour during her first return visit to the UK. This is likely due to the abundance of food that we have in Poole Harbour and the lack of competition which you'd experience as a non-breeding bird. So pretty quickly she found the chicks and she started associating with them on a near daily basis, flying down and perching with them, flying in the sky with them, interacting, and I've no doubt that at some point her and LS7 will have come face to face. This is a great interaction for the chicks as it allowed them to observe and learn some adult behaviours, but more importantly for CJ7 as an adult, it probably convinced her that this is a really productive site to breed at, and it's likely what's contributed to her returning to Poole Harbour every summer since then in an attempt to breed herself. And then, after what simultaneously felt like practically no time at all and an eternity, and in reality had only been about 3 weeks since their release, the chicks' instincts kicked in and they began to make their way off on migration to West Africa. And who should be the first bird to go than, that's right, you guessed it, LS7. He left on the 25th of August, which is relatively early for a young bird, and it indicates that he was in really good condition and able to exploit the favourable weather, like the good winds and the clear skies. And we hoped that it would mean that he'd have a really safe journey. Now I'll be honest, at this point I was not expecting to hear back about LS7 or any of the other chicks from the Translocation Project for a very long time. Maybe 2 or 3 years down the line when they eventually returned to the UK at the earliest. So we were understandably blown away when in January 2018 we received a message from one of the rangers at the Saloum Delta National Park in West Senegal saying he had seen LS7 at one of the prime osprey spots within the national park. Not only had he made it to West Africa and survived thus far, he had chosen a perfect wintering spot. We all knew that 2019 was going to be the earliest we could expect to see one of the 2017 translocated chicks returning to the UK as adults for the first time. And so when spring 2019 came around, we were all very hopeful, especially given that CJ7, the adult female born at Rutland, had come back in 2018 and once again oversummered in the harbour. On the 1st of April 2019, she arrived on one of the artificial nests in the harbour, and it wasn't long before she'd started adding nesting material, giving us real hope that this could be our year. But sadly, despite plenty of birds passing through, including another adult female who stayed on a nest for a while but was unringed, so had unknown identity, CJ7 was once again left alone in the harbour. Until, on the 12th of June, at 10:27 in the morning, 2 birds were spotted on a single nest. With a little investigation, we were able to find out that it was LS7, and I cannot begin to tell you the emotion that overcame us at this point. It was the first real evidence we'd had that all of our hard work, all of our effort was finally coming to fruition, and we could potentially be seeing the beginnings of a brand new population of breeding ospreys here on the south coast. Of course, as soon as he turned up, CJ7 pounced on him, and the pair were practically inseparable for the whole of last summer, spending most of their time visiting the artificial nests, adding some material, even making 1 or 2 copulation attempts, and encountering last year's translocation chicks, which again will have done an excellent job of reinforcing to them that this is a prime site for breeding. So when they both left on migration in late August last year, we were all very hopeful for what spring 2020 might bring. And sure enough, on the 2nd of April, just 1 day later than last year, CJ7 arrived on one of the artificial nests in the harbour. But contrary to our expectations, she was incredibly elusive over the following week, making only a handful of appearances on any of the artificial nests in the harbour, and not a single one on the nest that she and LS7 had favoured so strongly the summer before. The very one which that winter we had installed a very expensive, very generously crowdfunded live stream camera for you all to enjoy them. Typical. This left us all slightly concerned. Why was she not going back to the nest? Did she not like it now after the installation of the new camera? Or had she given up on breeding completely? Well, fortunately it seems not, and just over a week after she originally arrived back in the harbour, she put in her first early morning appearance on the live camera. And every day since that she has gone back to the nest and spent a lot of time there, adding material to it, scraping out a nesting bowl, and generally staring wistfully into the sky, looking for LS7. So where is he? The first thing to remember is not to give up hope. Whilst there is a chance that he may not return, the survival rate of adult ospreys is incredibly high, around 90% annually, and therefore the chances are, wherever he might be, he is hopefully alive and safe and well. However, we must also remember that he is only a 3-year-old bird, and so breeding might not be at the forefront of his mind at present. We're hoping that the experiences he and CJ7 had last year of bonding and nest building really will have helped to drive that forward and drive the urge to breed and drive him to come back early this year. But in reality, we could see him any time between now and the date that he arrived last year in mid-June. If they are to make a breeding attempt this year, he's going to need to return by early to mid-May at the very, very latest, allowing enough time for them to pair up and to mate before the end of the laying season. But don't worry, this time is actually the peak time for 3-year-old individuals to be returning to the UK, as we saw just in the last week at the Dovey nest in Wales, where they've had 2 intruder birds, 1 male, 1 female, both 3 years old. But even if we don't see a breeding attempt this year, don't worry, it's more a question of when rather than if at this point. And the translocation work that we're continuing to do is building upon the number of ospreys that call Poole Harbour home. And hopefully 5-10 years down the line, we could have several breeding individuals here in Poole Harbour. The fact that we're even considering having breeding attempts at this stage means we're actually ahead of schedule, and it's all down to those 2 extraordinary individuals, CJ7 and LS7. So let's keep everything crossed for LS7's return, keep your eyes to the skies, and we'll have an update for you soon.